solar or battery industry to China or Germany because we refuse to make the same commitment here. We've subsidized oil companies for a century. That's long enough.
This is pre-Solyndra, of course.
Pre-Solyndra. Tom?
You know, this notion of picking out something and calling it a good thing, like education or affordable housing or whatever it might be, everything is a matter of trade-off. What did the band say there?
That he will not cede wind or solar or the battery industry to China or Germany because we refuse to make the same commitment.
It's amazing that here is a man talking about 5 different industries, in none of which he has the slightest experience. You know, but because he has these degrees from the places you mentioned, he thinks, and people have told him how clever he is, he now thinks that he can do this.
So can you...
No human being on this planet can do this.
Can you explain, Tom, the particular appeal to intellectuals of the kind you describe here, of the green movement, of the environmental movement?
Oh, it shows them again in the role they relish. They're the wise and noble, forcing the rest of us poor dummies to do what's right, even though we don't want to.
So it's what your old friend Karl Marx would have described as the will to power.
Yes.
All right. You don't want to cut them a little slack. You're just saying it's ego and pride and vanity.
Yes.
All right. Once again, the President of the United States.
Tax reform should follow the Buffett rule. If you make more than $1 million a year, you should not pay less than 30% in taxes. And my Republican friend Tom Coburn is right. Washington should stop subsidizing millionaires. In fact, if you're earning $1 million a year, you shouldn't get special tax subsidies or deductions. On the other hand, if you make under $250,000 a year, like 98% of American families, your taxes shouldn't go up.
I love it.
You're the one struggling.
Tom?
When people keep their own money, that's called subsidizing them. I love it. You know, that's the brilliance of intellectuals, that they can use words in such a malleable way that they can. Obama has an absolute talent for saying things that make no sense, but not only sound plausible, but inspiring. You know, we're subsidizing the oil companies when they deduct the cost of doing business, in order to arrive at the figure of how much net income they have. Everybody does that.
Right. So this notion, though, that if you're rich, you ought to pay more. Straightforward enough, no?
It is straightforward, but it's also straightforward nonsense.
Why is that?
People don't. They often speak of people who are rich as people who happen to have money.
Right.
Extremely few people happen to have money.
There aren't that many Rockefellers.
But Rockefeller didn't happen to have money.
But his heirs happen to have it.
Heirs happen to have money.
So you're
Rockefeller reduced the cost of oil to a fraction of what it had been before him, benefiting millions of people across the country. Therefore, they bought their oil from Rockefeller rather than from people who had more expensive ways of producing oil. For example, one of them being the use of tank cars on the railroads. The progressives were livid that Rockefeller could ship his oil at a cheaper price than the other producers. It never occurred to them that Rockefeller shipped his oil in tank cars, which are a hell of a lot cheaper to transport than in barrels. Right. I mean, we still measure oil in barrels today, but we ship it in tankers.
Right.
And that's how he became a multi-billionaire.
So we know from the study of economic history that wealthy people get wealthy by creating jobs, lowering prices of products, rather than Bill Gates, the richest man in America, one of the richest men in the world, invented an entire industry that simply didn't. All right. We know all that. And we also know, as we mentioned earlier, that cutting taxes worked to spur economic growth in the 20s, again under John Kennedy in the 60s. Actually, it was Johnson who ended up. Most of the tax cuts took place, let's call it under the 60s, and then again in Ronald Reagan in the 1980s.
And then George W. Bush.
And George W. Bush. So how is it that he can stand there in the face of this overwhelming evidence and be taken seriously. I'm not asking now about Barack Obama as an intellectual. I'm asking about the people listening to him.
That's the question of the hour. You have people who don't stop and think. You've had dumbed-down education. You've had propagandistic education. And people, what he's saying connects with all those kinds of things.
All right.
In fact, it goes the other way too. I was just doing some research on Detroit and its decline, and they kept raising the city income tax. And every time they raised the tax rate, the tax revenues went down. In 2008, Charles Gibson put this to